episode 6 of Meet the Toberts. I'm Sue Tobert. I'm a pediatric cardiologist, recently retired, having practiced for a little over 30 years in medicine.
And I'm Daren Tobert, sleep medicine physician, and used to do pulmonary critical care.
And together we bring you 80 years of combined experience of practicing in medicine as a dual medical couple.
Mm-hmm.
And today we're finishing part 3 of our series on family matters, which is where we have really been focusing on thinking about having a family, raising a young family, kind of those middle years. And today we're going to focus on managing the teen years and beyond as a dual doctor family. But first, we always like to share a few statistics. And here's a couple tidbits of data about dual doctor couples.
Yeah, so there's quite a lot of us, actually. 2024 survey puts it at about 26% of physicians. Is that 26% of doctors are in dual couples, or is it 26% of physicians are married to another physician? Because that would make it 52% of all doctors.
Yeah, it's 26.
26. So 1 in 4 doctors are married to another doctor.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then a 2016 survey of 5,500 physicians found that almost half of them believed their career negatively impacted their relationship with their children. And I know, talking to older physicians that mentored me, they really complained about that. And, these were the old saints, kind of priests of medicine who pretty much gave up their life to it. And, as a routine would work 100 plus hours and be away from home for that long. So I know there are at least 4 or 5 physicians who privately confessed to me regrets about how much time they'd spent away from their kids.
Yeah. And we're kind of on the cusp of working those long hours versus kind of shifting into how medicine is now. But we talk about no regrets. No going back, no ability to go back and change. Here's another statistic. Women in physician marriages have been found to work 5 fewer hours per week compared to other women physicians. I really found that statistic interesting. And similarly, men in physician marriages were found to work 3 fewer hours per week. So maybe this indirectly contributes to a psychological benefit of a dual couple team.
Or what it could indicate too is just that your average physician works way too much. I mean, they're not having a family. Is that because they're not able to have a family because they're too stressed at work, or is that because they choose not to?
Right.
Hard to know, but just simply having kids apparently makes you work less.
You may not perceive it to be less, though. Right. At least that would be my experience.
Yeah. Well, you work 3 hours less at work, but then you work 300 hours more at home.
Correct. Exactly. Yeah. Which actually leads to the next point about parents being expected to parent like they don't have any other job, right? Like they don't have kids. And so it is kind of 2 careers at once that you're trying to balance. And
no, you said that wrong. You said parents are expected to work like they don't. You said parent as if they don't have kids. So anyway, no, parents are expected to work just like as if they don't have kids.
A job.
So yeah.
Yeah. All right. So let me rephrase that. Parents are expected to parent like they don't have a job, right? So it's like trying to balance 2 careers, the work career and the home career. And you're supposed to give both of these your all, which is basically impossible. And like we were talking about yesterday, it leads to just kind of like this cognitive max. You can't fit any more in your brain. You can't fit any more in physically. And you're needed all the time by somebody, right? So we've previously highlighted some of the challenges and rewards of starting a family, thinking about starting a family, the whole infertility challenge that some people face. We talked about kids in the younger years, balancing those middle years. And today it's about raising teenagers, connecting with your adult children. And I've always said that what's different is that it's a physical game when they're younger for parents. Like you're just kind of needed physically to be present and manage and feed and clothe, et cetera, all the time. But what I've noticed raising 3 young women into adulthood now is how much more of an intense psychological game that is. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, so definitely. Our work schedules obviously pull us away from full-time childcare. So that means, like we've talked about before, having a team around you that can help with childcare, using things that you might not want to use, like after-school care and so on, um, handing them off to a nanny or having a nanny in your home or other things. But it meant that our kids were maybe less supervised directly by parents than they otherwise would have.
Yeah.
And so we, wanted to raise independent young women, and we hoped and prayed that they never have severe traumatic experiences or distance themselves from us or find support in other less healthy ways, such as through, toxic friendships or addiction or other, substance abuse, that kind of thing. These things are rampant among teenagers and young adults. So, I think we were very fortunate to mostly dodge that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
As they get older and move away from home, go to college and beyond, then you have to look at things like where are you going to locate relative to your kids? When they're still single and in training of some sort, it's not as big a deal because they're very busy with that. But once they start to get, relationships and more tied down to a different locale, a lot of our contemporaries now are struggling with where do they locate based on where their kids are. Their kids are in, Tennessee or in Seattle, or sometimes they've got one in each place. How do you possibly manage that and still keep it so that your kids feel that you're treating them equally? That's always been a big thing in our house, is equal treatment. The girls demand that, and we have tried to navigate that as best we could.
Well, wait a minute. There's a little difference between equality and that kind of equanimity type thing, and we've tried to bring that up with them. Like the younger one may say, "Well, so and so, the older one, got this," and we're like, "Well, you're like actually 6 years younger than that older sister, so who knows what's going to happen in 6 years?"
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and one of the other realities that they have to eventually get to is that life isn't fair. And as an adult, we know this.
That's right.
And, but the girls expect complete and utter fairness in their mind, right?
In their mind.
How they perceive it. So those are all challenges that you have to deal with. So I wonder if you think that your background in peds and your constant work with children made any difference in your parenting style.
Yeah, that's a good question. I've pondered that over time. Certainly training in peds gives you a lot of background about the developmental changes that occur in kids over time. I actually tried to pull that into my parenting. So it helped me lower my expectations, especially when they were younger, or what did I expect of them as young teens and tweens. It's still really concrete thinkers. They're not going to necessarily kind of track what I'm saying and be committed to it. They got their own agenda. They're very self-centered. So me being aware of that as a parent, and I think us talking about that was helpful. Did it totally solve issues? No. I mean, I'm still human. You're still human. We still react like people too. So, but I think to some degree it was beneficial. The other thing I'm thinking of is a recent blog you and I read about from the White Coat Investor, just about how to focus on being happy. And I think it kind of translates to our kids too. Happiness is more about focusing on others, serving others well, and also lowering expectations, as I just mentioned, as a parent. What are my expectations of my kids? And in fact, when I read the blog, talked about it, I realized we kind of did this with our kids. So maybe we were helping them in the pursuit of happiness to some degree. For instance, being other-centered instead of self-centered. What did we do to help them with that?
Volunteering. I mean, they came along with us when we did things like teaching Dave Ramsey's course at the church, serving at the church. They saw us doing those kind of things to serve others. Just through our work, we're focused on our patients, and they saw our focus on our patients as an important contributor ultimately to happiness. Although I don't know that every time we got paged, we were immediately demonstrating
There's a
how happy we
balance
were,
with
right?
being other
But
focused, right?
yeah, so,
Yeah.
but early on, the girls helped in the nursery at Sunday school. And yeah, just you had, um, we've got some family legends like the time that you helped out the
Oh,
homeless
yeah.
people at the Dairy Queen just by
Yeah.
buying them some food
Yeah.
and giving that to them. Missions work and missions trips,
Yeah.
they saw those as ways to
Yeah.
help. So yeah.
We wanted to teach them to be generous people early on. And I think even when we looked at the financial part of it, what part of your funds that you're earning, even when you're a babysitter, set aside some for charity
Mhm.
and for giving. Go through your closet. What can you donate? So I think that what's really interesting to me is I think my kids are more generous than I was when I was their age. Like I just was
Yeah.
kind of holding on to stuff, and
Yeah, me too.
I felt like there
Definitely.
was, and I wonder if this is generational. I felt like there was scarcity in our family, and we were middle class, but my parents were kind of that, were they
Depression
boomers,
era.
depression era
Yeah,
kind of thing?
they grew up in the depression,
Yeah,
right? So yeah, they
yeah,
grew up with that mindset and transmitted some of that to us.
yeah,
I agree with you. I think our children are just naturally more generous than we are, and I consider us to be relatively generous.
yeah.
But so when we're raising teens and above, you're developing more adult themes, right? Like generosity, and what is true happiness, and how do you achieve that in
Purpose,
life? So these
purpose.
are a little
Yeah.
deeper topics. They're a little more adult topics that are more fun, maybe to try to inculcate in your children.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think more transformative conversations come along the way, and those
Mhm.
opportunities exist with your teens. So I got to ask you this. We've talked about burnout related to work. Do you think you ever experienced parent burnout?
Mm, to some degree. I mean, I'd say more so when they were little.
Okay.
Once they become physically independent, then it's more this, like you said, the psychological
Right.
and adult theme
Yeah.
training, mentoring, if you will. So I think that's easier for me than the physical part when they were young.
You think so?
For me, it was
Okay.
just the,
Mhm.
um, being up at night, changing diapers,
Mhm.
physically carrying 15 suitcases on vacation,
True.
these kind of things. So for me, the harder part of parenting was when they were younger, and that's too when I was in the ICU.
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
So
Yeah,
I was under enormous stress
yeah,
just from that.
yeah.
So I think now I'm doing sleep medicine. It's much lower stress. And I think it's maybe that's part of it too. But it's also just the difference in the parenting style as they age.
Yeah. Well, personally, I think for me, sometimes this whole psychological processing of the issue that they bring forward, like I'm trying to be proactive. We're trying to be proactive. So we've had to learn to kind of pause when they bring something forward, make sure we think it through rather than just simply react. And right, we're about being proactive. What can we kind
Mhm.
of, in a healthy way, engage in a conversation. And sometimes it involves taking time. Like, I'm just thinking of around discipline and stuff, like teenage stuff. Our kids were just regular kids. And, we didn't do a lot of grounding. We wanted to talk through things with them. Here's my thing on
Grounding, she means like as a
a punishment.
punishment,
Yeah.
right?
So,
Grounding kids.
so here's my thing. Like, an example, the kid does something, comes home late after whatever curfew maybe you set, and so they're grounded for a week, they can't go out with friends. Well, here's my issue with that one is, I can't keep track of their grounding and what they're doing and whether or not they're breaking the punishment that I gave them. Like, I'm just giving myself an extra chore, right? And so we were like, why are we assigning ourselves extra tasks here in trying to over monitor the kids because of what they did? So let's come up with a different approach where maybe it's not, we weren't maybe so strict or regimented around punishment, um, but more like let's engage in a discussion. And sometimes, more often than not, we ask them, well, what punishment would you like to give yourself? And that was really, actually, first of all, it's entertaining when they assign their own
Yeah.
punishment, but they actually came up with reasonable things.
Mhm.
So, yeah, discipline, I think, is one thing where we landed on the same page. I think that was really important, but don't like over assign work to yourself around the discipline. We had a timeout chair, and sometimes I would go sit on the timeout chair because I needed the timeout.
So yeah, and it evolves too as you're training the first, then the second, then the third, right? Yeah. And the first will always point this out to us, how we were far harsher with her
absolutely
than with her sisters. And so, and there is some of that. Honestly, it's true. You realize after the first one, breaks the rules, and you have to go through the consequences of whatever rule she broke and deal with that. You realize it's not the end of the world, and the kid is still going to be okay.
Yeah.
So there's definitely an element of truth to that we did not parent each of the kids identically, for sure.
Yeah. Well, and here's another thing. If we were really restrictive as parents, what I was always concerned about is a punishment where you're restricting something from them leads to loss of autonomy and feeling like they have no choice, which removes hope. And I never want to remove hope from anybody. And then at the same time, they can go into ninja mode. So they are excellent at workarounds. Think of how we do workarounds at work, right? Epic doesn't work this way. We find another way to do it. And so kids are superb at workarounds. I don't want to know, let me rephrase this. I don't want to miss out on what those workarounds are. I don't want them skirting around the outside of us as parents doing something clandestine and we don't know about it, and then things get even worse. So be aware, kids can have their autonomy, always leave them with a choice, a way out, and watch for workarounds and ninja mode. Very, very good at that. Teens are excellent at that.
Mm-hmm.
So how about from this?
Yeah, and then I think too, you talked about just having open discussions about some of the thorniest topics that teens face, right? Like, let's have a talk about bullying. Let's have a talk about alcohol, right? Mm-hmm. We introduced our kids to alcohol early. We grew up in Canada where the drinking age was 18, and our first, legal servings were bought for us by the university, right? At freshman.
Right.
At freshman introductory classes, right. They'd have a beer keg and everybody would have a beer as they're listening to the lectures. And so it's a little different environment. I think it made alcohol not taboo, like off limits. I think you can see the consequences in American society from having a later drinking age and keeping, otherwise responsible adults from their privileges as adults. This has terrible consequences for teens. They drink more as a result of it being illegal. When they get access to alcohol, they pound it. They don't just sip it and learn how to manage the effects on the body. So I personally believe that restricting kids and stopping natural development of responsible behaviors is not good. You've got to give them enough room to make mistakes, and yet not so much that they're in danger. So balancing that, I think, and having open discussions with your kids about thorny topics, sex, drugs,
rock and roll.
Well, that's an easy one because they were raised on rock and roll. So.
Yeah, but our generation of music, not their own.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's an important thing to just have a discussion with your significant other / spouse about those years. When you're talking about that, make sure parents are on the same page. I think that's another whole point, is that, the kids will totally try to come between you and play one against the other. Totally. Dad said this, mom said that.
And so you got to communicate.
Yeah, it really puts a premium on interspousal communication. You've got to be on the same page about child rearing with your spouse and how you're going to handle things. And sometimes it means deferring to another, like, okay, in the sexual area, Sue's going to handle that because she's the same gender as the girls. And so that.
Well, it's not that you didn't share what boys might be thinking.
Absolutely. But still, you can divide and conquer too.
Yeah.
But you've got to be on the same page about that. You can't be giving different messages.
Right. Have the same expectations.
Kids need consistent boundaries, and they need those enforced but then they need to be allowed to function within those boundaries, set reasonable boundaries, and let them function within that. And if they cross the boundary, that's when it's time to intervene, but not before. So, let them make small mistakes so they don't make huge ones later.
Right. As you're sharing this, what comes to mind too is how much we enjoyed the girls having their friends over here. Boys and girls alike. We loved being the place for them to hang out, because we could then supervise, and we kind of knew what they were doing, and that usually involved
and meet their friends and meet their parents.
Exactly. That kind of eye-to-eye contact and handshake and welcome. And then with that, it's around food and non-alcoholic beverages,
entertainment, get a nice big TV for them to watch.
Right, exactly.
Get a foosball table, be the host family, be the place where the kids like to congregate. That's, I think, going to really help in the long run, even though sometimes the noise gets excessive and bothersome.
You can't fall asleep.
It's something you do want to do, because then you've got a known quantity there. The
benefit too is you're teaching your kids how to host well as teens and young adults, which we see that in our girls now. They do the group dinners with their friends and things like that.
Well, and they've learned to set boundaries on their friends, and they'll start to have to, when they know we're gonna come down on them if their friends are doing something wild. They set the boundaries themselves, and they start to police their friends.
It's not acceptable. Right. Exactly. So just to clarify, I want to just go back for a second. I'm thinking about this. When we traveled to Alberta to visit family and the kids were 18, that's when they tasted their alcohol stuff. It's not like we were serving them and their teen friends when they were here. That's like not acceptable at all. So
but in
set
Wisconsin,
that boundary. At some of the restaurants.
If you're with your family at a restaurant, and if the restaurant assents or agrees, they can have a glass of wine, and there's no age limit on that. So, our girls probably tasted wine at, 15 with us in a restaurant setting.
One of our favorite French restaurants.
Right.
Yeah, totally.
So, but that's within the law.
And that's a culinary
friends
experience.
Are never, it's a culinary experience. It's also a experience of getting a mild buzz, maybe from a glass of wine at that age, and understanding how it's supposed to work. And so modeling responsible drinking. But no, we did not serve teens.
And you know what? You're welcome to judge us on that. It is what it is. It's in our past, and go forward the way that you see fit. It's about not enabling the kids, giving them choice, always letting them have hope no matter what situation they're in, but setting boundaries carefully as well, and letting them earn privileges and earn responsibility over time, as is fit with their age, I guess I'd say, as a pediatrician. So we're going to shift a bit in the last few minutes here about the whole financial piece of it, right? We like to pull this in, and I'd love to hear some of your advice on working with teens, finances, savings.
Right.
I mean, big topic.
From Family Matters episode 2, we kind of talked about giving the young person control over part of the budget, right? So we turned over the amount of money that we would normally spend on kids' clothes. We gave them that at a fairly young age, 10 or so. And that was just simply cash in an envelope at some point. They were expected to plan ahead for more major purchases, like a winter coat and those kind of things. So it's important to give them power and control over some money. And then, just like we were talking about with boundaries, that amount of money is limited to whatever the budget would be. They've got to function within that boundary, because if you were able to buy clothes on that budget, then they should be able to buy clothes on that budget. If they go blow the money on something else, number one, you have to let them make a mistake, and then they get to experience the consequences of not planning well, right? So that was a real hard thing for us, was to actually release that and let them make mistakes. I know you really struggled with that.
Well, it's not perfect. I'm thinking of an example. So I don't even know which of the kids, but they blow their wad of money in September for school clothing, and then we've asked them to be responsible for buying a winter jacket. So winter comes along, and no, I'm not going to send my kids to school with no boots and a coat, but they're wearing last year's winter jacket, right? And this is okay. These are first world problems, right?
Mhm.
But like that is how they have to kind of figure it out. They may not be pleased that they're wearing a little bit of a too tight jacket to school and all of that. And so then what I would end up doing is come January when the sales are on, right? Okay, well, hopefully you've saved a little bit. So, and we might cover that cost. Now you're going, right? So it's not perfect. We'll get you an on sale jacket that fits you instead of one that you've outgrown, but we're
Mhm.
going to have to wait until sale time and you're going to have to take what you get kind of thing.
Mhm.
But it breaks the rules that we're talking about, right? So there's flex in all of this,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Right.
There's some flex, but then it always brings up opportunities to educate and say, look, here's what happens when you don't save money. You don't have money for a winter coat. So you got to have money set aside, right? So we worked on that too with an emergency fund. I want to go to a concert. Well, go to a concert then. Oh, I don't have money. Well, did you budget for entertainment?
Right. This
Right?
is as they're getting older,
As they're
right?
getting
Yeah,
older,
yeah.
right?
Mhm.
And budgeting is very simple. It's just, you take their allowance and they divide it up into whatever envelope categories they want. Usually it starts extremely simply, like maybe food, giving, entertainment, and that's it, right? Just three things, or food, entertainment, and stuff and giving.
Right.
So we always insisted on a giving envelope. We insisted on them buying, if they want to go out for fast food when we're serving dinner to them at home,
Yeah.
but they prefer to go out with their
Yes.
friends for fast food,
Ooh.
they get to pay for that experience.
That's a teen thing.
Definitely teen thing. So those are just some thoughts around budgeting. You give them enough money that they can function. Don't give them a buck a week for chores. I mean, that might work when they're 2 years old, but you've got to give them enough money so that they can have control over at some point a significant purchase. Like, if they want to save up and buy the expensive Barbie when they're young, give them enough that they can realistically save for that within a few weeks, because a kid that age just doesn't have the time span that we have.
Yeah.
So as they're growing up and you're doing budgeting, that's one thing we talked about was time preference. What is time preference? Well, if you read the Austrian economics school, time preference is a very important concept, and it helps you to have what they call a low time preference. I call it a long time preference. So when you're young and very concrete, you don't think past the next hour. As you get older, you might be able to think up to Friday, right? And then when you're a full adult, you should start to be able to think in terms of years and decades.
And
right?
retirement.
And retirement eventually comes in there, right? And we expect that by someone is 18 and entering the workforce, we expect them to be able to make a long time preference decision, like putting money in a 401k, right? So you want to kind of grow that in your kids. And so using an allowance early in life and then gradually increasing the amounts to allow them to make these long time preference decisions is a good thing to do. So, yeah, and then just some of the practicalities of it, definitely starting with cash is the easiest. It's visual, it's physical, they can understand it immediately.
But we're
And
less of a cash world
we're
all the
less of a
time
cash
now, right?
world, but cash still works. And for training young folks, I think that's the best way to start. We went to when you start to abstract it and take away cash, then you move to something like a checking account with a debit card, right? And we did that with our kids probably at age 12, 13, where they got a debit card and they had to understand what swiping it means, okay? And they had to understand the concept of overdraft and what that means, right?
Well, that's true. They did experience that.
Yeah, they did. They all got to experience the joy of getting a notice from the bank that you owe them money right now and you have to pay it back right now, and not having an emergency fund and so on.
So there was some ease in doing that for us, though, because you would just transfer their allowances right into their account. And I mean, that streamlined things. And then they could check their app and they could see things have, gone up and they have so much to spend, which of course, then they want to spend immediately.
Right. But then that's a level of abstraction, right? The money's moving, but it all happens digitally. They don't see the cash in hand. So you've got to make that age appropriate. And then, you're still working hard on budgeting. The concept of an emergency fund has been very difficult for our daughters to get. And I think a couple of them don't really have an emergency fund. So they're still learning on that account as well.
So here's the thing too, is that by the time they get to college or post-secondary school, whatever they're going to be doing, they're going to be inundated with credit cards by 18. Credit card applications and companies coming after them for credit cards. So we wanted to teach that concept earlier as well, which was kind of unique and maybe not perfect for our family, having kind of that credit account where everyone had a card. Explain that.
So, yeah, well, we would at some point, when your kids begin to travel independently, you want to send them away with a method of payment that they can use in an emergency, right? So usually that would be something like a Visa. Initially, it can be helpful to just have your kid be an authorized user on one of your accounts.
That's it. Yeah.
They actually will build the card still shows on their own credit report, and as you pay it off in full every month for ever, your kid builds a credit rating. So by the time they come to the point of being able to manage credit cards, that's late though. That's like, I'd say college or even graduating college, where they have an independent credit card.
Your point about travel is important because some of our girls traveled like last year of high school on a school trip.
Yeah.
And we wanted them to have the ability to,
in an emergency, they may need to pay an airline at check-in for a bag, right? A $30 fee. Yep. And if they don't have money in their checking account at the time because they spent it on souvenirs, then they got to have a way to pay. So that's what I would do for that. We are, I'd say, pretty big into travel hacking. We like to earn those points, which convert to miles, which allow you free flights and stuff like that. And we've had some good results with that. But that's an advanced financial topic, right?
Right.
And the big thing is that you've got to be in a financial position to do travel hacking. I think you've got to be in a position where you've got excess cash flow. You absolutely pay off all your cards in full every month, never pay interest.
Really important point to teach the kids early on with that.
Never, ever pay interest. And so that would be an advanced financial topic that they're only getting to now in their mid-20s.
Right. But we do have a daughter who has saved her points on her credit card.
Yep.
And has been able to fly to Hawaii on points. So, good choices and good things for them to learn early on.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So I think, and again, just always working in that, what are you doing in the way of giving, and keep that as part of it.
Other focused part of life.
Focusing on others is really helpful for long-term happiness. So, yeah.
So we'll bring today in for a landing. We'll kind of close up our circle of trust. And the points that we kind of made today are around focusing on connection with your kids, like building the support, being proactive with privilege granting, but at the same time, being aware that boundaries need to be set with these teens and young adults, and being mindful of what enabling is, kind of saying one thing and then giving in and taking over teaches them a different habit that is harder to break.
Yeah, I think don't let your guilt about not being there as much because of your career. Just try to make sure you're not just trying to paper over the problem with money
and stuff,
right? And stuff, and a focus on, materialism.
Right.
Just make sure that you don't have to apologize to your kids for being a busy physician. I think you need to own that. Yep, I was not there as much as I could have been if I'd had a different job. But you know what? You're going to be okay, and we're going to make sure that you're covered. But I am not just going to spend on you out of guilt.
Yeah.
So make sure that you get your heart right with that.
Right. Yeah, we've touched on that parent guilt and that whole overcompensation. And I like what you said, they're going to be okay. Kids are so resilient, and here they are, they bounce back well, which is why I love pediatrics. We talked a lot about teaching them to be other-centered rather than self-centered, having that giving spirit. And then I know we talked about just lower your expectations of them and be mindful of where they are developmentally, but be present when you can, be fully present. And what would you say? What's your summary of the finance part of it?
Yeah, I mean, with the finance part, just, train them up. It's going to require some repetition. I think the whole concept of setting appropriate boundaries and letting them function within the boundaries, and letting them actually cross the boundary and see what happens when you overdraft your account. It's
Absolutely.
it's a good thing to do. It's a $35 fee that somebody's going to have to pay. The kid will have to pay it. You make that happen, and they will learn early on. So give them, enough rope to stumble, but not to kill themselves, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And then I guess maybe the last thing is really work to stay on the same page and be
Mm.
consistent in your messaging as parents, because they will go in ninja mode and they will develop workarounds and bait you against one another.
Yes, they will.
Be
Mhm.
aware.
Evil little buggers.
But you gotta love them, don't
Yes,
you?
I love 'em.
Oh my gosh. All right, it's been great.